Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Within Modern Warfare 3, obviously, while we do have all the carry forward content from MW2, we also have the new MW3 weapons right now. 36 weapons in total, and I've gone through, I've maxed out every single weapon in the game. I'm super close to unlocking Interstellar, so I've got a lot of play time with each one of these guns, and today we are going through the overall Modern Warfare 3 meta for the first time and ranking where every single weapon falls in said meta. So as we get into it, if you enjoyed the video or if you find it helpful at all, do me a favor, drop a like on it. It would be really appreciated. And if you're new here, you want to guarantee that every single day you are up to date with all things going on in COD, whether it is news, updates, meta breakdowns like this, it's all right here. So feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. But I've gone through and created a brand new tier list and tier maker for Modern Warfare 3. And with this, we have our standard, competitive categories. We've got absolute meta, the true best of the best. If you want to do well, you use these guns. They are the most effective tactics available. We've got overall competitive. They're decent, not the absolute best, but if you use them, you're probably going to do pretty well with them. Average, you could use them. You might do well with them. Other players might struggle. Below average, not really worth using all that much. Niche, could be very good in super specific situations, or they're only used for one specific situation. Could be good or bad. And then garbage, obviously you want to stay away from forever. And I've gone through, I've made the list of every single weapon in the game as of right now. And keep in mind, throughout the years, we've seen new weapons drop throughout the seasons and various weekly challenges. We'll be updating this list constantly, so we'll always be coming back to this for future reference. But getting right into it, we'll start towards the bottom here and work our way up. So the MTZ-762, it's honestly a decent battle rifle. It's probably the middle of the pack with the three that we have, the BAS-B, the Sidewinder, and the MTZ. If you're using it in single fire, you can spam it. It's really not all that difficult to use. Most weapons in this game, for what it's worth, aren't really all that crazy. But at the same time, in terms of, mid to long range weapons, which is where you're primarily going to be using this, it's really nothing all that crazy. We're just going to start off an average for this one. The Sidewinder, on the other hand, this one is rough. Probably one of my least favorite weapons in the game. As of right now, we'll give it a below average, but by the time we go through and rank, I kind of want to see where things fall. This one might drop into garbage because it is not great. Its fire rate is abysmal. Its recoil controls not really all that good either. It just doesn't have much going for it. Well, so we'll see where this one fully ends up. The BAS-B, however, is 110% an absolute meta option here. This thing fries. It's got a little bit of recoil, but by comparison, not all that much if you're looking at the Sidewinder or even some other guns on the list here as well. And its damage is phenomenal over the mid to long range. So this thing is 100% a fantastic, versatile rifle for sure, and can compete with the other assault rifles. It's a really great choice. One of my favorite guns right now. The FR556 is kind of a tricky one because honestly, burst weapons in this game are very good. And we do have some rifles coming up here. Then we'll get to the others later on in the list. But I mean, the FR556, it's the FAMAS that we had back in MW 2019. And it definitely does not feel as bad as it did before. If you were accurate with this thing, you can honestly consistently two burst, and that's pretty surprising in my opinion. So we're gonna go for competitive with this. It's really gonna come down to how accurate you are with your bursts. If you're super accurate, competitive for sure. If you miss a couple of shots in there, you're not super good at spamming those bursts and tracking, it's probably closer to average, but it's a decent rifle for sure. Rifles kind of run things this year. Speaking of which, the DG58, you guys already saw perhaps the video that we did specifically on this where I dropped some nukes. It's absolutely nuts. This thing is ridiculous for a burst weapon. I fully 110% see this getting nerfed here soon because this thing is insane. If you are accurate with your bursts, it will melt. Then we got the MCW, which honestly, surprisingly enough, is also falling in the absolute meta category. It's the lowest recoil, most straightforward, easy to use weapon in the game. You point and you shoot. It's the ACR. The thing fries. It's actually got a very competitive TTK as well, and especially when you factor in accuracy, while most guns in this game are pretty easy to use, this one really stands out as like anyone can pick this thing up and do well with it, even with some wonky setups, right? The thing is just that good. It's basically built to never fail. Then we get into some of the other categories, and like I said, we're going to revisit the rifles here in the mix of things, but the Karambit and the Gutter Knife obviously are melee weapons. Those are going to fall into niche. No surprise there. You're not really using these in a competitive sense whatsoever. And the RGL-80 also falls into niche, although honestly, going through these camo challenges with this thing, I'm contemplating putting this thing in garbage. If an enemy has EOD, unless you direct impact them, you're not getting the kill, man. This launcher is abysmal. Going for the double kills for priceless is rough. You just have to hope and pray that the enemies don't use EOD, because if they do, you were in for a not so fun time. We do got some of the pistols lined up here. First up, the Wasp Stinger, basically a pistol version of some of the SMGs. And this thing for a pistol is honestly decent for sure. I'm gonna drop it in average because pistols in general in this game really aren't gonna compete as well with other main tier options for close range, like maybe shotties or SMGs, but it's definitely a decent option. Doesn't have a ton of ammo, and it's got a bit of visual recoil because of how fast the fire rate is, but if you can land your shots, it's gonna do just fine. Nice little pocket SMG in a sense. The tier is an interesting one because it can be very good, but it's also average at the same time in the sense of its drawbacks. If you're hitting those headshots or those close range areas, it's basically a pistol shotgun, but if you miss, you're probably not going to end up getting the kill. It's almost more niche in that sense than anything, and I think that's where I might put it, because if you're deadly accurate, it's very good. If you're not, it's not it. So niche, I feel like, is a somewhat appropriate placement for that. Outside of niche, if we didn't have this as a category, it's probably bouncing between average and below average, honestly. The Renetti, honestly, competitive, mainly because of the conversion kit here. It's basically turning into a mini SMG as well. Super low recoil, great mobility. That conversion kit really does make the difference there. It feels really competitive for close range and is probably the best secondary in the game, so we'll go competitive for sure for that. And then the Core 45 conversion kit, or a standard, just an average pistol, nothing too crazy going on with that. It's your basic like Glock every year, the starter pistol essentially that we always end up seeing. The Holger actually makes an appearance mid here. I don't know why the order is so funky, but regardless, the Holger, also an absolute meta rifle. Up there with the MCW in terms of the easiest to use in the game. They basically instantly GA'd this from competitive, which means the gun is way too good usually when the year starts. So this is one, if you're trying to, you know, absolutely fry, jump in with it, it's going to be a great choice. The KV Inhibitor Sniper, honestly, there's nothing really all that impressive about this. It'll one-shot to the head like you would expect from a sniper. It's pretty heavy and pretty slow and feels more like a marksman rifle than anything though. For that, we're just going to drop it in average there. Nothing too crazy, but it's nothing too bad. The longbow's probably a bit more of an average competitive option, definitely bouncing between these because, again, it's so dependent on your aim, right? If you are able to consistently hit upper body shots, so we're talking upper chest, neck, and head, you're probably going to 1 to 2 shot with this. If you can't and you're consistently getting like lower body shots, it's not going to feel all that good. I think for most players, just because of how things function in this game with flinch and whatnot, we'll probably see this as more of an average sniper. And then the cat is another tricky one because snipers in this game are still just in an awkward phase because they're a little bit heavier and slower and the game does play so fast. The cat will one-shot pretty much everything, but it's abysmally slow. So its drawbacks are there kind of balancing it out. Again, average and competitive is the general area where it'd fall. I feel like, again, for most players, that'll probably be more average than it is competitive, given the current meta that we'll see by the end of the video, of course. The MTZ Interceptor Marksman Rifle. This thing is honestly pretty powerful. It's got a very strong upper body shot. So if you're hitting headshots at a one-shot, even in core, its fire rate, though, really brings it back. So honestly, I would say this is probably more of a average option as well, an average option there because it's just not super standoutish in any way. And that fire rate, again, given with the fact that it's a higher skill weapon being semi-auto, means you got to be crazy accurate. It's just a little bit too unforgiving probably for most players. However, some could excel. The DM56 got to be below average. This thing has very little damage for a marksman rifle. You can almost build it to be like an FAL almost in a sense for like running and gunning close range, but even then it just doesn't feel like it brings that much power. It's got some decent mobility if you kit it out right, but there's nothing really going for it as of right now that makes it stand out, even in its own category, which is pretty rough. The MCW 6.8, obviously the marksman rifle variant of the MCW, not nearly as good as the base MCW though. We're just gonna go ahead and drop this one in average. Nothing really crazy going on with that. Then the KVD Enforcer right there as well. I mean, the marksmans are pretty balanced. They're all relatively similar. They don't feel all that unique when you're changing from one to the other. It again really is dependent on how good you are at tracking while spamming a semi-auto gun. If you're really good at that, you could excel because when you do hit shots, they hit. It's just there's a lot lot of skill gaps in place that balance them out. Now, the LMGs in this game are pretty solid, all things considered here, right? So first up, we've got the Bruin. You can build this out to be a very aggressive, very fast LMG, obviously similar to how we could in MW 2019, and it's most certainly a competitive option right now, and definitely is nice to sort of revisit this once again. The Holger 26 is one of the more average LMGs. In all honesty, its damage is kind of mediocre in comparison to some of the others, although it can also still be built out to be pretty aggressive if you're using the right attachments. The DG58 LSW, again, a counterpart to the DG58 rifle, not nearly as good. It's got an interesting conversion kit as well, which makes it crazy aggressive and fast and doesn't feel like an LMG whatsoever, which is fun for sure, but in a competitive sense, not really taking those over something like the Bruin quite yet. Then real quick, just because we're on the topic of LMGs, the Pulemyot, 100% competitive because its base just hits like a truck, and if you use the conversion kit that makes it like a bullpup AR LMG and you can run around with it way faster, that's also really fun to use too. So those two LMGs definitely stand out to me. We do then go to our last rifle, I believe, here with the MTZ, or one of the last rifles rather, and this thing is honestly a faster fire rate, more aggressive, like mid-range rifle, as opposed to some of the other ones which are more medium to long range. This one though, 100% competitive as well. Really good choice for, you know, the more aggressive players out there who still want to use a weapon that's got the power of a rifle but also want to run and gun more like an SMG. It's a nice sort of hybrid medium ground there. We do got some of the shotguns here. Again, an interesting category this year. The Riveter itself is not good. In core, in hardcore, it's semi-auto, so you can spam this thing like crazy, and if you use tac stance, shotties in general are very good, but man, this thing just has no damage. You can be up close in hardcore and still get hit markers. It's brutal. Not a fan of this thing. The kill streak challenges and whatnot, all the camo challenges with this thing really were a pain for sure. The Haymaker's a bit better of an option. It's certainly more competitive than the Riveter, but nothing that is game breaking. It's definitely powerful whether you're ADSing or hip firing, and it's actually got a surprisingly good range as well. It just does take a couple of shots here and there depending on the exact range and where you're landing your shots on the body, but overall it's pretty decent for a shotty. And then the Lockwood 680 is absolutely a competitive option. This thing can one pump a lot. If you're playing hardcore, it's basically always a one shot, of course, at some pretty extreme ranges, mind you, but then even in core, this thing can run around and just tap players. If you're ADSing and running and gunning, you get into some close range gunfights, you can go on some crazy feeds with this thing. I actually really enjoyed going through and getting this thing camoed out. We then get into our SMGs, and I'm not gonna lie, the SMG category this year is underwhelming. A lot of these are just mediocre for sure. So initially, the Striker 9 is basically a more aggressive, fast-firing version of the base Striker, and while it's got some decent close-range damage, overall, long run, it's more of an average SMG than anything, I would say, just because it is not going to outgun a lot of things up close besides other SMGs, and that's more dependent on your aim than anything. It definitely falls off hard, too, as well. The Rival 9 is fortunately one of the more competitive SMG choices here for sure. It's the CX9 kind of. It's got some crazy mobility. Its ADS speed is wicked fast. It's got some good just general mobility stats as well, and its close range TTK is very competitive. The Wasp 9 is also pretty solid. It's kind of like the Milano. This is going to be one that again kind of depends on your accuracy. It's probably more of a versatile SMG than these other options here because it's lower recoil and has that mid-range, but its close range damage kind of underwhelming, and across the board it's kind of just lost in between being a mid-range SMG or, you know, trying to compete with rifles in that area. It's just not going to go all that well. We then get the AMR 9, and this thing is not it either. I'm going below average for this thing. Leveling this was not ideal. In hardcore, that was the only place that it felt like remotely competitive. It seemed like it was able to kill things there, but in core, if you ran into basically any other SMG, it was going to be a rough fight there, and if you were running into a different weapon, an AR that had its scopes up or an LMG that had its sights up, you could just count that you were going to be seeing a kill cam, right? The Swarm, probably our second best, maybe first best SMG, depending on who's using it, right? Definitely up there with the Rival 9. Its TTK is best in class pretty much across the board. It's got a crazy fire rate. You do got to aim train a little bit. bit with this thing, but at the end of the day, as far as its stats go, it's going to be one of the more rewarding options in the category. And then the base striker, as you might recall, back during the beta, this was maybe the best gun in the entire game. It was crazy broken. Well, they adjusted it accordingly because it's average as can be now. It was, very easy to use close range or mid range or long range in the beta. Now it's still super easy to use. It's a deadly accurate SMG, but its damage definitely is pretty lacking, especially in its, second and third drop offs in the mid range there. It falls off pretty severely for sure. Then our last option here is the SVA 545, and like all the other rifles, it's a competitive option at the minimum. It's really cool that it has that hyper burst feature, so if you just tap fire those first 2 bullets, you're going to end up melting because of the increased TTK there with how fast the fire rate is. Takes a little bit of getting used to with the control, but this thing is versatile, it's consistent, and if you're not hyper bursting, its control is also very easy as well. So I'm actually very surprised that the meta is this healthy right now. There are some quarrels that I have with it, but really you can tell a meta is healthy if the majority of the guns are in average or better. There's very few bad options, and most of the guns in this game you can use and get away with and do well with depending on your level of skill. But there's a clear trend here. If you're using a rifle, you win. That's about as simple as it gets. The rifles utterly dominate in this game, which is surprising because we haven't seen this in so long. In MW2 and Warzone the last year, the rifles were super underwhelming. Not the case here. The SMGs here not really holding their own as well. A lot of the marksmans and battle rifles don't really have a super unique feel, and they're not really standoutish in any way. So I would love to see a bit more variety, maybe with the weapon classes themselves, seeing a few more SMGs and battle rifles and whatnot up here, maybe a few less rifles, just to have a mix of all weapon types. But for the most part right now, this is how things would play out in the general meta. So if you're looking for guns to level up, pay attention to the absolute meta category, the competitive category there. You'll have some really, really good choices. But that being said, that is going to wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video or if you found it helpful at all, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new here, you want to guarantee that every single day you are up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.